Over the years, I've been 45 years an environmental and human rights activist. I work 7 to 8 days a week on all sorts of issues. You could say it's a hobby of mine or a passion. But I think if we can't stop fluoride, we can't stop anything. We can't stop pollution. Fluoride's pollution. If we cannot do this simple thing, which is equivalent to turning off a tap, we can't do a thing. So we might as well give up and say the human race is doomed because we're all so stupid. I really feel that I cannot give up on this issue. I will not give up on this issue, and other people shouldn't either, because it's outrageous that we are being poisoned. And it was started by the nuclear industry. If people think I'm exaggerating, they should read Christopher Bryson's book, The Fluoride Deception. It's all in there. And the very person, Harold Hodge, who recommended that fluoride was safe and effective at 1 part per million, he was the very same person who was working for the nuclear industry, and he was injecting people at a local insane asylum with radioactive plutonium as an experiment. And there are pictures there. All of this information has been very thoroughly researched by Christopher Bryson, and it came out through freedom of information. And it's rigidage. It's not a conspiracy theory. This was started by the nuclear industry and the aluminium industry, and now the fertilizer industry is making some very big bucks out of it. And I really think that people in Australia and around the world, in countries where they have fluoride put in their water supply, need to wake up.
Is there anything you'd like to say to mothers with little children?
Yes. The American Dental Association actually said a couple of years ago, maybe it was 2006, that parents who were feeding their children milk formula should not be making it up with fluoridated water. Now, we already know that that would be giving them 200 times more fluoride than they should get for their size, because children drink a lot. And the reason the American Dental Association said that was because it would give the children fluorosis in their teeth. Now, the teeth are a continuation of the bones, right? So if you've got discoloured teeth or pitted teeth, or teeth that have holes in them because of the fluoride and fluoride poisoning, this is an outward sign that you can see your bones are actually affected too. And I remember listening to Paul Connett telling people that in areas where children drink fluoridated water, they have far more cortical bone defects and far more breakages, and this is according to the statistics. So not only is it damaging their brains, it's also damaging their bones. And then there's the other issue. After they've been drinking fluoride since they were tiny wee babies, as they grow up, their teeth become brittle. And I remember my dentist in Melbourne saying, you know, I can't understand it. I'm getting a lot of young people now in their teens and 20s, and they've got brittle teeth. And I actually read about something recently, they call it the fluoride bomb, where along the meninges, along the edges of their gums, they develop holes, but the holes are underneath the hard layer of fluoride, and so you've got this big cavity forms. The bugs are working away inside, eating away your tooth, and all of a sudden, hey presto, you've got a huge hole. So the fluoride actually makes the outside of the teeth hard and brittle, so they're actually more vulnerable. The other thing that the fluoride does, it stops the turnover of the bone, and this may be why little boys tend to get osteosarcoma in areas where there is fluoride put in the water supply, because it stops the bone from renewing itself, and that in itself is not good, because it's stopping the bone from doing what it should be doing, breaking down and reforming, breaking down and reforming. So it probably keeps the fluoride in contact with the cells for longer, and that may be why. That's just my theory, but we do know that it's recorded on the statistics, and it was also it's been proven in several tests, and not tests, studies. And the latest one was Elaine Bassen's study. But it wasn't just her. It's been known for some time that fluoride is bad for bones. And here in Portland, just down the road from here, the kangaroos were crippled with fluorosis. Now, they've got 500 acres around Alcoa. Those kangaroos just go through. They're not even confined to that 500 acres. And some of those kangaroos, over a period of a few years, got to such a stage they could hardly hobble, and some of them had to be put down. Now, I went to a meeting down at Alcoa, and I was told that the health department is not concerned about this because it only applies to kangaroos and it doesn't apply to people. Does that make sense to you?
So what are the kangaroos actually in contact with?
Now, this is the thing. All around Alcoa you have fallout. They've spent an awful lot of money trying to capture some of the fluoride so it doesn't completely all go out into the atmosphere. It falls onto the grass, and it falls into the soil, and it falls onto the vegetation. And so the kangaroos are eating vegetation which has small amounts of fluoride on. Depending on where you are, there's more or less. And it's had an effect on their bones. Now, what about all those people in Portland who are breathing in the fluoride? What about all those kids who have more fluoride in their water supplies these days? And people are wondering about that now. Why do we have more fluoride in our water supplies? It's not being put in by the government down there. And they're breathing it in as well. Are we going to have children who are less intelligent down there? Are we going to have people down there who are going to get hip fractures as they get older? And a friend of mine in the dental profession told me he's very concerned about the impact of fluoride on people who drink it for a lifetime, because particularly people who are Aboriginal Australians are more vulnerable to kidney disease, and particularly women, as they get older, they can get hip fractures because their bones are brittle because of having absorbed the fluoride. And I think it's time for the authorities in Australia and the politicians who make the rules to look at this and stop plugging their ears and closing their eyes, because there is evidence there. It's been acknowledged in studies. It's been proven in studies overseas, and it's about time we did something about it here in Australia.
Might I add, of all these people that plug their eyes and ears, that they actually have children and grandchildren that will be affected by fluoride if these politicians actually don't have the courage
Yes.
to relook at the science.
Yes.
And make an informed decision based on science and testing. And since Australia actually hasn't done any testing, how can Australian politicians truly make an informed decision?
They cannot. They have to have an investigation and a study, a proper bona fide study by toxicologists and medical researchers, and it should also take into account all of the evidence from overseas, and not just the NHMRC stuff, which a lot of it is fraudulent.
What does the World Health Organization say that health officials should do before implementing fluoride within communities?
They say that organisations like our NHMRC should first of all ascertain how much fluoride people are getting from all sources. So we're breathing it in, we're getting it in our water, we're also getting it in our food and in beverages. So we're actually getting far more than we really should. We're getting an overdose. But nobody's ever mentioned and nobody's ever carried this out in Australia. It's just one of those things that's totally ignored. In other words, the Australian health authorities are contravening the advice given by the World Health Organization.
Should governments be taking note of what the World Health Organization is saying? Isn't that their duty of care to their citizens?
Well, yes, and they also should be taking notice of what people who have high qualifications in toxicology say about fluoride, and cell biologists. I mean, the quickest way to kill cells is to subject them to fluoride, and that's what cell biologists use if they want to stop cells from multiplying. It's a poison, and it has effects even genetically. It's a hormone disruptor. Scientists know that, but our ignoramuses in the health department are completely ignoring all of that. There's something else. It's not just water fluoridation that we should be concerned about. Now, we know that fluoridation in the water supply at 0.5 parts per million has been shown by Chinese studies to affect children's intelligence. It lowers their intelligence. Now consider 90 parts per million. 90 parts per million is what we'll get into dried fruit and nuts and some other foods, maybe even more, because of the use of another fluoride in warehouses for food. And this was approved about a year or so ago by the government here in Australia, and they've followed like sheep in the wake of the USA because they use that there too. It's supposed to be for killing insects, but you can kill insects in a non-toxic way. You don't need to use sulfuryl fluoride, which is many times more in the food than we will be getting in our water supply. Now, we're all worried about what's in our water supply, but what's in the dried fruit, the sultanas and things like that that little tots like to take to kindergarten, and the nuts that you think are nice and healthy, and anything that's in a warehouse. I sometimes wonder whether the government is really trying to damage people's health. I mean, they say, oh, it's okay at 1 part per million, but they never mention that they've given permission through the APVMA for us to have our food fumigated with this stuff, sulfuryl fluoride. Google it, see what it says. Professor Paul Connett has been active on this one too, and I was one of the people who put in a submission on this. But there's a great lack of knowledge here in Australia. Why? Why is it not known that this stuff is being used on our food? And I should add that there is a report which has been written by Paul Connett. It's called Joining the Dots, and it details how the NHMRC and the Health Department have deceived people. And so I'm not saying that I'm not really saying that this is fraudulent just off the top of my head. What I'm saying is scientists say that this is fraudulent, and there is scientific evidence, and all you have to do is go and look, like my doctor did. She read 100 studies, one after the other, and she's got heaps and heaps of evidence that what we are being told is lies. It's not safe, it's not effective, it doesn't stop caries, and it's bad for our bodies, it's bad for our brains, and it shouldn't be put in the water. And she went and read it up, so anybody else can too. And I challenge any medical practitioner who thinks that fluoride is good to go and do the homework. Well, if you've got a situation like that with an important issue where people's health is at risk, it shouldn't be the subject of a vote. What it should be the subject of is scientific testing. We need to have scientific testing, and that hasn't been done. And when fluoride was brought in here in Australia, a lot of doctors and scientists were against it, and the tests to prove whether it was safe or not were discontinued before it was put in the water supply. And the NHMRC said about 18 years ago, I think it was, that this stuff should be tested for efficacy and safety, and it's never been done.